So, I'm not really supposed to be here today. Jerry Huseman. Jerry's still recovering from some surgery that he had back right before Christmas, and so he was unable to make it. So I'm pretty much pinch hitting for him, and we expect him back probably in the next month or so. So anyway, glad to be here and handling things for Jerry. That's probably a good idea. So anytime that we have a meeting with more than 2 people at BASF, we have a safety moment. And I think it's a good idea. Maybe a lot of you all do that. It's your place. And I'm going to talk a little bit about driving. I've been driving a long time. And I guess I just remember, years ago, you'd get behind somebody that's swerving or driving erratically, or they're in the passing lane and they're not going very fast, and you'd always want to pull up there and go, I wonder who that is. And back then, it was usually somebody that had been drinking and driving, or maybe they shouldn't have their license because they were too old. Well, now it's that person. I drive a lot in my job, and almost exclusively you see somebody texting, talking on the phone, and they're just oblivious to what's going on. This is not my picture. However, I had a similar experience. I was going to Pennsylvania, pulled up beside a bus, had been in the passing lane, running off the road a little bit, pulled up beside them. They were texting in the school bus. Now, there was nobody on the bus, which was a good thing, but it's a little scary to think that people think that's okay. Or, how about this guy? No hands, texting on a motorcycle. Not good. Probably some of you all have teenage drivers. All my kids are grown. And I just remember, when you handed over those keys, that was scary. And now these kids, have that phone right in their hand. They're not going to let go of it. And so it's even more scary, I would think, for you all. But I want to share something with you, and that is we're required every 3 years to take a defensive driving class because we drive so much. And at that defensive driving class, we do a lot of emergency maneuvers through cones, etc. And at the end of the day, they say, okay, all those maneuvers that we've been doing, I want you to text while you're trying to go through the slalom course. What do you think happens? Failure. It is not good because you're distracted, texting, you can't respond to what you need to respond to. So all I'm saying is either hands-free or just don't do it because it is very dangerous for you, for other people on the road, etc. Something that you really need to think about really, really hard because it's continues to be a mounting problem. So just a little bit of my own experience and sort of what I've learned. So it's a little scary. So I've got a pickup truck. Most of you all probably have a pickup truck to do your job. Not everybody needs a pickup truck. You can take your 76 Camaro, convert it to 4-wheel drive, put a snow plow on it, and you're good. Or, plenty of you all hunt. Your Dodge Neon, your trailer hitch, and we can rig up a system there that works. Or 3/4-inch piece of plywood, we're good. It's pretty, and hey, I grew up working on a golf course. I remember improvising on things all the time. And this was pretty good though. So, one of the things that I want to talk about today, I think Jerry's title was strictly sprayer technology kind of thing. I want to talk a little bit about misapplications and not allowing that to happen, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. Another thing is doing your own research and why you should do it. And then finally, talk about getting your sprayer ready for the season as things hopefully warm up. I thought that was going to happen. So, has anybody seen that picture before? High school football field in the Chicago area. They obviously made a misapplication. Looks like a Kevlar gun, round up, killed the whole field, had to go and play on another field that year because they couldn't resod it and get it ready in time for the season. We don't want stuff like that to happen, obviously, but it does happen. And 4 times last year, some of you all are familiar with Pylex. Pylex to kill Bermuda grass, kill goosegrass, crabgrass, post-emergent grassy weed material primarily. We had on 4 occasions, and it's not registered for greens, superintendents put it on putting greens. And they put it out at very high rates. Our normal use rate for Pylex, 1 to 1.5 ounces per acre. They were putting it out at 3, 4, 5, 6 ounces per acre on their putting greens. That was not a good day. Why did it happen? The spray tech meant to use Quicksilver. The container looks almost identical, but he put out he picked up Pylex instead. So it didn't happen once last year, it happened 4 times. It was one of these crazy things. It's like, was it the way the sun was, what? Something happened, and so we had to deal with that. Are we considering changing our packaging? Of course we are. We don't want that to happen ever again. But in the first place, it really should, it could have been avoidable. Let me just say that. Let me back up. So I remember talking about this with some other superintendents, and one of them jumped up and said, now, how did that happen? I mean, you've got a 3-year-old that has prescriptions, and would you ever give them the wrong prescription? That would be a no. You wouldn't think you would make that mistake ever. So how did this happen? I think probably because you might have a few prescriptions at home. You all have 100 different products in your chemical storage room. So it's a little different. So anyway, but it's pretty scary to think of that. So then we had this happen, where the superintendent told the spray tech, it's hot, it's humid, we need some preventative Pythian material out there, put some Segway out. Segway sounds a lot like segment. Segment kills grass. It's our product. Many of you all use it in native areas to control grassy weeds in your fine fescue. They spray segment on their greens. Ouch. We can't allow this to happen. And here's another thing, and I tell you what, I spray plots, I spray, my lawn, etc. Here's something I did that you need to think about too is, so big jugs, I didn't want to deal with these big jugs. I put them in smaller containers. What did I do? I put Roundup in the surfactant container, and so every time I went to spray something and put surfactant in it, I was out there killing grass. My daughter's lawn, my lawn, it was pretty embarrassing, but it happened. And it could have been avoided because you should never put something in a container that doesn't belong in. Keep it in its original container, is what I'm saying there. Like I said, I've been doing this a long time. Here is what I suggest. A couple of things. One is A lot of people don't have their chemical storage room organized by herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, PGRs, surfactants. You need to do that so that when you or your spray tank goes in there, they're pulling products from the right spot. Okay? That's important. Second thing is, if two people are doing it, the chances of making a mistake go down a lot. So my suggestion to you is have two people that are pulling the products, two people that are mixing loading, so that this doesn't happen. Because I'm thinking, like with the Segment Segway or the Pylex Quicksilver, with two people, somebody would have caught it. So anyway, just a suggestion to you all to maybe keep you from, something like this ever happening, because it was pretty scary. And nobody lost their job. The turf ended up rebounding, but not a good situation. Not a good situation. So, yeah, this is about 5 miles away from my house, a little par 3, where they put the wrong product on their greens. And I hope they fired this guy because he did such a crappy job of spraying more than anything. He didn't kill the whole thing, but what do you do if something like this was to happen to you? Understand that chemical companies like ours, when we bring new products to the market, we've already looked at 1, 2, 4x the normal use rate, and so we've got some built-in safety there. My point to you is, if you over-apply it by a little bit, you've got nothing to worry about. That's a non-issue, because we've already looked at that, and it's fine, okay? So understand that. What I tell people too is, first thing, if it's an hour a day, for 3 or 4 days, activated charcoal will give you some peace of mind, because if it's a residual product, then you're tying up whatever's there, and you don't have to worry about it anymore, okay? Sprayable activated charcoal seems to work really, really good. So that's my first suggestion. Heavy watering, like on coarse textured greens, seems to help also. Use of colorants to mask the damage is another good suggestion. I know a lot of you all use amino acids or humic acids, whatever it might be, and most of the time they really improve the recovery of the turf. And then I always get this question, should I fertilize? No! The turf's stressed. Leave it alone, let it rebound. Once it rebounds, then you can fertilize and get it going. So you don't need any fertilizer on it initially. So hopefully those are some good suggestions for you. So let me jump to talking a little bit about doing your own research, and why I think this is a good idea if you're not doing it, is because things happen that you don't expect to happen sometimes when you do research, and you find out some interesting ways to use products. And in fact, one of our sales reps once said this: what we put in the jug is chemistry. What you do with it when you take that lid off is art. And each one of you all know what you're doing, have done it a long time, have figured a lot of things out, and know what to do, what not to do. We're providing the chemistry. You're making sure that you're getting it out there properly. The reason I even talk about this, I had a situation last year. Many of you all have used Exemplar for dollar spot control. So Chicago District Golf Association, I work with them, and they were looking at Exemplar at the mid-rate to determine if we add surfactant, can we improve control? And then the other thing they were looking at was gallonage. So they were looking at a ½ gallon per thousand or 1.5. Now I would have sat here and told you the 1.5 is probably going to work a little better. Air induction nozzles, so they were using a good nozzle. Now, you're looking at this 45 days after the last Exemplar application was made. At 28 days, everything looked very similar. As we let it run out, we saw some differences in residual control. What we found out too was the surfactant had no effect at all. And understand too, so when you see a product and you look at active ingredient, inert ingredients, what do you think's in the inert ingredients? What is that? Anybody know? What do you think? Water? A lot of people say water or petroleum solvent or whatever it might be. We put in surfactants, buffering agents, stabilizers, algicide, mildewcide, so a lot of things go into that to try to improve the formulation to make it better for you. So there's a lot more than just the carrier, if you will, in there. So anyway, both rates look good at 28 days, but as it sort of worked its way out, residual-wise, the lower volume looked better, and the researcher felt like, you know what, we've got a higher concentration of active ingredient in each spray droplet. And I think, Rick, are you going to talk about this today?
No, but go ahead. Go ahead.
And maybe I'll ask you to chime in. But what researchers like Rick Latna found is that I used to think fungicides, the ones that lasted the longest were the ones that hung around in the soil the longest and like delivered disease control for a longer period of time. It doesn't work like that. What happens is when you spray, the ones that last the longest are the ones that are most effective at knocking down the inoculum, boom, right away, and all of the inoculum. And then over time you'll get some rebound, and that's when you'll see dollar spot at 30 or 45 days. The ones that are less effective at controlling that inoculum when you spray are the ones that last 10 days or 14 days. That's how that goes. It doesn't have anything to do with residual like a pre-emergent herbicide, where the long-lived ones last the longest. That's not how it works, oddly enough. I never knew that until Rick shared some information. I just always thought it was all about the residual. So, once again, we were thinking each droplet more concentrated amount of exemplar in there control the disease better. My point to you is, I wouldn't have thought this would have happened. That's why you need to play around with these products, conduct your own research, and see for yourself. Because they might do things that you don't expect them to do. So, yeah, this to me was pretty interesting stuff. All right, let's talk about getting your sprayer ready, and I think, and these are Jerry's slides, what he had in mind was to talk about Nozzle and the new Nozzle technology and maybe some of the things that you need to be looking at. And like Jerry says up here, you want really good coverage, you want to be using the best nozzles out there that you can. And things have come a long, long ways over the last 10, 20 years, that's for sure. Now, you might look at a company like BASF or Bayer or Syngenta and go, you know what, I look on the label and you all really don't tell me very much about what gallonage to spray, what kind of nozzle to use, how to control drift, and we don't. And here's why. Everybody has their own go-to favorite as far as the equipment they're using, the gallonage they want to use, what works on their golf course. So everybody's different. So you see it pretty ambiguous on our label. We might say 10 to 200 gallons per acre, okay? Because we've got people using that product in all sorts of different situations. Or we don't tell you one specific nozzle. We've got guys that might be using a Chemlon gun. We might have guys that use something that puts product out at 5 gallons per acre. So it's all different kinds of things. So we don't really tell you that. So it's sort of up to you to figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and what's the best gallonage, nozzles to use, etc. Why is getting that spray out uniformly important? Figure this. On a square foot that you spray, a gallon per thousand, you're putting out less than a teaspoon of water on that area. So there's not a lot going out there. So let's make sure we get it right. Let's make sure we get it right. I'm going to mainly talk about spraying systems nozzles, the T-Jet products, but I've identified the groups of nozzles that are probably the most popular on their list. And I think the big one that you're going to see is the twin jet nozzle. That's the latest and greatest kind of thing. And for those of you who haven't looked at the twin jet nozzles, you need to consider those, and I'll get to those in a minute. But we've got the turbo T-jet nozzles, the twin jet that I just mentioned, air induction obviously. The XR, the extended range, are just the old flat fan nozzles that have been around forever. Very good, but have been around forever. And then the turf jet nozzle, the more flooding type of nozzle. So when you look at a nozzle, everybody's pretty familiar with what the nomenclature is on that nozzle, what it means. Like the XR 8004 is there, extended range, 80-degree nozzle, rated at 4 gallon, 0.4 per minute at 40 psi. So all that information is right there on that nozzle. These are the standard, the extended range, the old flat fan nozzle. You can buy just the nozzle, you can buy the whole body, so it locks in there properly and you get a good spray alignment. They continue to be popular. If you're putting out fungicides, I know Rick, in your trials, you probably use these XR nozzles for trial work. And you will see here that they give excellent coverage. So this is water-sensitive paper. It's yellow starting, and then when you spray, it turns to blue. This is all blue. You're going to see a lot of these aren't totally covered up. So from a coverage standpoint, great. From a drift standpoint, not so good. Not so good, but great coverage. The air induction, and I bet you probably 80% of you are using air induction nozzles. These work very, very well because they're a nice balance between drift control and coverage. Very popular. So here's that water-sensitive paper again. And you can see there's some yellow in there with the air induction nozzles. But that's still very, very adequate. That's very, very adequate. Here's some air induction extended range. Extended range basically meaning a broad range of pressures that we can work at to control the volume that we're putting out. The turf jet nozzles, flooding type of nozzle. If you've got high winds, this one works the best. Pre-emergents are fine with this particular nozzle. A lot of guys use this in the spring of the year, windy, putting out pre-emergents, and can do a nice job on that. But when you look at coverage, not nearly as good as some of the other ones, as you can see here. However, with pre-emergents, when you apply pre-emergents, they migrate a little bit in the soil. Okay, they move. They've got some volatility, and so the gaseous activity where they move in the soil. So that it's not really that important to have total coverage all the time with something like that. The old raindrop nozzle, these probably were introduced 30 years ago, and those were some of the first ones that we used for drift control back in the day. So I mentioned the twin jet nozzles. A lot of guys are going to these, and if you look at that performance chart that I first put up there, these work very, very well. Figure you've got 2 sprays contacting the turf or the weed or the disease or whatever it might be, and so very effective. So my suggestion is, if you haven't looked at these twin jet nozzles. You can get it in the turbo or in the air induction. Something to think about, because I would say these are the top rated nozzles right now. And I'm a Chevelle SS guy. Maybe some of you all are, I don't know. But so you know the air induction nozzles have this venturi right here to pull air in, puts air into the droplet, makes the droplet heavier, bigger, less drift, and that's how basically it works. And the old Chevelles had the flap on the hood scoop that would open up when you romped on the gas to get a little bit of extra air. For those of you that maybe don't know about the old Chevelle, so good stuff. This was something pretty interesting that I want to show you. So this was from Virginia Tech at the field day a couple of years ago. And what they were doing, so they had these fans that you see here. They're putting out a 10-mile-an-hour wind. And what they did was they had different sets of nozzles on the boom right here, flat fan, turf jet, air induction, etc. And they had these stakes out at 1-foot intervals with water-sensitive paper on there, and they were determining with a 10-mile-an-hour wind where was that spray going. And obviously, with those XRs, the spray was reaching all the way out here to I think it was about 10 feet away. So it was a lot of movement. The turf jet, the coarse textured spray, didn't move very far. The air induction moved a little further than the turf jet, but not nearly as far as the extended range, the flat fan nozzle. So anyway, a good way to demonstrate to superintendents, hey, what's going on here. I talked about the twin jet nozzles. So here's the turbo with regard to the fineness of the spray droplet. Sort of sits in the middle. Here's the air induction, a little bit coarser. But like I said, you're basically getting that turf or that disease from two sides now, which really helps with performance of different products. Anybody here have issues with water quality, water pH in their sprayers? Anybody deal with that? The bottom line on this is, if you do, is everybody thinks, you know what, I need to change the pH before I put any of the chemicals in. Now, what you want to do is put the chemicals in, because they're going to affect the pH of that water, might drive it up, might drive it down. Then take a water test, a pH test, to determine what's the pH of the spray that you're putting out, because that's what you're interested in, not of the water that you're using particularly. That's important too, don't get me wrong, but make sure that you're also looking at the final pH with some of the tank mixers that you're using. And I know some guys have put 12, 15 different products in there on occasion, so something smart to do. Mixing order, I think everybody's very familiar with what you should be doing with regard to mixing order. Dry materials in first, liquid products later. Adjuvant should be really the last thing you add to your tank, whether it's MSO, crop oil, non-ionic surfactant, whatever it might be, before finishing off that tank. But it is important because it can affect compatibility if you're not putting it in the right order. Here are just some suggested rates for some of the surfactants that you might be using, okay? Like methylated seed oils, a lot of our products require methylated seed oils, and we're up at 2 quarts per 100 gallons. Crop oil, non-ionic surfactants that you see there. Calibration, you all are very familiar with this, but just check yourself. Do a physical check. I know your computer might be telling you one thing if you get computer-driven sprayers. But the other thing too is, take your rig, put it on the asphalt, make sure that the pattern looks like it's you expect it to look, because sometimes it could look like this, where you've got, nozzles that aren't performing like they should be. So do a little test. Check things early in the year, during the middle of the year, the end of the year. The other thing too is, every year, throw away your nozzles, put a new set on there. They're gonna be worn, they're cheap. There's no reason not to do that. There's no reason not to do that. One of the last things I want to talk about too is with regard to gallonage is, there are diseases like Pythium root dysfunction or fairy ring or summer patch that on our labels it says water it in with X amount of water. And a lot of times I get the question, well, can I just elevate my gallonage, like maybe let's say 4 gallons per 1,000, is that adequate? And so, because I don't want to water in, I got golfers, this, that, and the other. Here is what you need to know about that. If you water in with 1/10 of an inch of water, which many labels say for diseases like that, that is 62 gallons per 1,000. So 4 gallons per 1,000, 62. Huge difference. So the reason we say water it in, because 4 gallons is not enough. 62 is what we want out there in a nutshell. So don't forget that, and don't think you can work your way around that. Okay, very important to make sure that you water the product in. And I know you all probably heard my accent a little bit, but we spell like we talk, if that's okay. We're not good spellers because of that, but it is what it is. And waiting around for some warm weather, love to ski. Here's Rick Latin up at Liberty National, playing a little golf. I know he's chomping at the bit to hit the golf course. And with that, here's one of our locations over in Germany, or one of our plants. We're German-based. 40,000 people go to work here every day. 40,000 BASF employees. So, yeah, 24/7 that plant runs. So with that, questions, comments about anything that I shared with you, whether it's the misapplications or doing your own research, or even about any BASF products that you've got a question about. Anybody?
I'll shoot one.
Tom, thanks.
This could be, first of all, I believe there are such things as stupid questions, and this might be one. But if we're
Let's try
watering, if you're watering, what did you say, 62 gallons?
Is 1/10 of an inch.
Okay. So if you're watering in, does that change if you're on pure sand versus a push-up? Because the infiltration rate would be much different with seaweed?
It probably should, but we, on our label, we're very ambiguous about that, because everybody's got different soil types, and, so we have a chart that would say on sandy soil, do this. The answer is it probably should be different, but the bottom line is, if we just tell you to water it in, then it's gonna help. It's gonna make a big difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. Thank you. But what happened